Welcome back, everyone. Isn't this a wonderful day?
Yes.
I hope you all are enjoying it as much as I am. Thank you for coming and supporting the Pat Conroy Literary Center. In our third and final author program of this afternoon, we're delighted to welcome Marcus Amaker, who also participated in our Conroy Center's very first author event, Poets Respond to Race, in February of 2017. Marcus served as the first City Poet Laureate of Charleston from 2016 to 2022. His poetry has been recognized by the Washington Post, the Kennedy Center, American Poets Magazine, the Washington National Opera, NPR, the Chicago Tribune, PBS Newshour, South Carolina Public Radio, Charleston Magazine, the Post and Courier, and other publications. He's also a prolific performer, the award-winning graphic designer of a national music journal, a musician, an opera librettist, the creator of a poetry festival, a teaching artist, and an advocate for youth poets. In 2019, Marcus won a Governor's Arts Award in South Carolina and was named the Artist in Residence of the Gaillard Center, a world-renowned performance and education venue. His 10 books include The Birth of All Things and his forthcoming collection, Hold What Makes You Whole. He is also the editor of Colors Wash Over Me, a collection of Charleston High School poetry resulting from one of his youth advocacy programs during his tenure as Poet Laureate. Please join me in welcoming to March 4th, Marcus Amaker.
I'm here to honor all parts of myself. The man who is scared of death but romanticizes heaven. The warrior who would kill for his daughter and stays up all night, spooked by shadows. The fire-driven miracle seeker who pretends to rise above everything. The hot mess. The punk rocker. The full-grown gentleman who cries when watching Star Wars cartoons. A descendant of sassafras drinkers, of collards, cabbage, and black-eyed peas in Orangeburg, South Carolina. I'm here to honor every version of myself. The teenager who was too embarrassed to tell his friends he wrote poetry. The sour adult who is proud that his muse has the confidence of honey. The polymath and the adrenaline avalanche of youth, the body that is well on its way to decay. The empath who water skips through life but is afraid to go under. I'm here to give grace to everything I am. To lay a blanket next to the grave of my former selves and sit among seeds that were never meant to flourish and dig up reminders of how I've come to be in bloom. Like many artists, I am really in love with my latest works. I have a crush on all of my new poems. So I'm going to be reading some newer stuff today from my forthcoming book that'll be out on April 4th called Hold What Makes You Whole. It's cool to be here, having the opportunity to, again, get back in the routine. I think COVID messed us all up in so many ways. And mentally, it's been a little bit of a challenge to get used to getting back up on stage and doing this and being comfortable doing it again. But I'm honestly thankful for that challenge because it's helped me to really refocus on what I really love doing. I'm like, do I still want to do this? Yes, I do. I absolutely enjoy this. So thank you for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about my career and then talk about, mainly really talk about this book, which is Colors Wash Over Me. which is a book that I produced last year with a whole bunch of students' poems, grades 3 through 12. I was fortunate enough to win an Academy of American Poets fellowship, and with that money, I used that to put this book out, and I hired 6 other poets to go into schools, and we gathered all types of poems, and I had them all on my Dropbox and put them all together in this book. And it's been a wonderful thing, because every once in a while I'll be at the grocery store or something, and somebody will come up to me, and it's usually like a parent or a guardian saying that they were really excited because their kid or their grandkid was in this book, and it was the first time that they were published, and it's encouraging them to write more. And that is a big mission of mine. I never have believed that I'm special in the fact that I can write a poem. You can all do that too. But I really enjoy the publishing process, and I think it's easier than a lot of us think. I grew up thinking that to be published, you had to be signed to a major, company. You have to do this and do that. I'm like, no, you can just do your book. We have tools to do that, especially for younger poets. I think that is important. Okay, so I'm going to talk, but first I want you all to snap your fingers if you are willing and able to. Thank you. That helps me to sort of calm my nerves. So I do have I have a big presentation with visuals and stuff, but we aren't going to do that. I'm going to talk our way through it this time. But I'll just sort of start from the beginning for me, and then moving up to this book, and I'm going to read you some kids' poems, and then I'll read some of my stuff as well, and take some questions after that, if that is cool. All right, so my black ass was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, in 1822. It felt like my dad was in the Air Force, and so I moved around a lot. So I moved from Vegas to England to Maryland to Okinawa, Japan to Texas, and then we came back to South Carolina after that. So my parents and all my family is from Orangeburg, South Carolina. I was the only one who was not born there. But because of those experiences, hopping around, being an only child, it was really difficult for me when I was a kid. But now I brag about it. I think it's kind of an interesting thing to flip that. But it was really tough for me because every 2 to 3 years, we were moving. So I would move into a place, make all types of friends, and I'd be like, okay, see y'all later. I'd move into a place, fall in love with somebody, and be like, oh, I have to move next month. I just was always moving. The good sort of side effect of that, I think I can make friends really well now, so I'm thankful for that younger version of myself. But also it helped me to really get in a bunch of different sort of energies and influences. So I'm a big fan of like punk rock music, like I wrote in that poem, a big fan of hip hop, a big fan of like heavy metal, all types of stuff. All these different influences are sort of seeped into me, and I think I really use that to my advantage when it comes to my work. And I started to write poetry when I was in high school, strictly to impress girls, and that did not work. But then I found out, I was like, oh, I actually really like doing this, so I just kept on doing it. So I started to learn graphic design when I was in high school, and I signed up for a writing class thinking that it was a poetry class. I've never really been one for details, clearly. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a poetry class, cool. But it ended up being a newspaper class, and I ended up really liking newspapers. So back in the 90s, that was like the job if you were like a writer, like to work for a newspaper. So I worked for newspapers for 12 years. The reason I came to Charleston is because the Post and Courier hired me. So I worked for the Post and Courier for 8 years as a graphic designer and as an editor. And so that visual element is really important to me. So whenever I design books or put books together, I think just as much about the fonts and the colors. Like all of my books are visual books. I've got a lot of photos and things in them. I think about that just as much as I think about the poems and the words that I'm using, and I can thank my newspaper life for that. This is such an ego trip, y'all. So I'm just going to talk about myself the whole time? I'm just talking about myself. Okay, sweet. And I also, what's interesting as well for me is that I have a speech impediment, and it's pretty pronounced in certain areas of my life, but when I was younger, it definitely was pronounced a lot more. So that version of myself is freaking out that I'm doing all this work and traveling and all of this. So I worked for the Post and Courier for 8 years, and then a lot of layoffs started to happen there because this was like 2009 or so. A lot of layoffs started to happen. I survived the first 2 rounds of layoffs, but it ended up being sort of a toxic work relationship or work environment. A lot of people were working from fear. It just wasn't a healthy environment. So I decided to leave, not really knowing what I was going to do, consciously not knowing what I was going to do, but I think unconsciously, subconsciously, I knew that this is where I belong. So I was always writing, I always had like a backpack full of poems, and when I left the paper, I had a lot of good relationships in the city because I wrote stories about a lot of local businesses. So I started doing graphic design on the side. I guess back then it was my main thing. But I was in a lot of businesses as well, being like, okay, we should do open mics here. We should do open mics here. And everyone said yes. So I started to pack places with poets. And everything from coffee shops to big stadiums and things like that. So I started to do a lot of shows and curate a bunch of shows. Then in 2015, the massacre at Mother Emanuel happened. And already at that point, so I had a name for myself in Charleston. John Tecklenburg, who was not mayor at the time, he saw me perform, and it was a benefit for the families. And I was there, and I did my piece. It was with a jazz band in the back. And he came up and said, hey, if I become mayor, will you write my mayoral inauguration poem? And I said, no. I'm just kidding. I said, yes. So I would gladly do that for you. So I collaborated with Marjorie Wentworth. Do you all know? Yeah. So Marjorie is amazing, and Marjorie is a mentor and friend. So we wrote that poem together. Soon after that, he called me again and said, we're creating the Poet Laureate position, modeling it after Columbia's and some other cities. And again, asked me, do you want this position? And I was like, no. And I said, yes, I want that. So it became a mission of mine. That was 2016. It became a mission of mine to open doors for other poets, particularly younger poets. I keep on thinking about me when I moved into town. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for us, and I kept complaining about that. And I'm like, I should just do it. Instead of complaining, I should just do it. So that being Poet Laureate amplified that work for me. So I had that title from 2016 to 2022. And throughout that, I was able to visit a bunch of schools. I'm still in schools. Often, if there's any teachers here, let me know, because I love being in school and teaching students. But also really taking the business of being a poet a little bit more serious. I definitely, the younger me was all about impressing people, trying to get dates, and stuff. And I think I had a little bit of that energy still. But then when Poet Laureate title came, I'm like, okay, this is a community position. So I learned a lot about Charleston and really dug into the history of our complicated and lovely city, and really just worked a lot on being a poet and also just opening doors for other poets as well. And for me, it's just there are a lot of poets out there. Whenever I'm in community spaces or in schools, so many people write, but don't feel like they have the access or the opportunity to have their stuff published. So I'm always the one to ask questions. I'm going to put student poems on billboards around town in April. Doing this book, putting on poetry festival, doing fun things like poetry and pancakes, which is a thing with a local restaurant. We got typewriter poets in there, so when somebody ordered a pancake, they got this questionnaire, and and we filled out the questions and we wrote poems for them on the spot. So things like that, I think making sure that people know that poetry is a flexible art form. It's not just in a book and static, like it's actually alive, and there's a lot of energy and fire there. So that's super important to me, presenting poetry in ways that you might not expect. So fast forward, I got the Poet Laureate title because Charleston, because it was a new thing for them, they didn't really have any processes in mind or a check. It was so funny, I got like a handshake and a little piece of paper, and I'm like, you can hand me a check too, so I didn't get that. So a big part of it for me now is making sure that poets get paid for their work. This is what we do. This is not easy stuff to be vulnerable on stage and to put all these emotions in a little piece, and inspire people. I think it's important that poets get paid. So I always talk about that with younger poets in particular who they'll get asked to do like a 5-minute thing for an event. And I'm like, well, that is 5 minutes of your time that you could have been napping, But it's also, you have to prep for it, you have to write it, you have to figure out the space and all of this. So anyway, I pushed the city in a gentle way to do that. But also I started getting grants and looking for a lot of grants. And with the Academy of American Poets, that was the biggest grant I've ever received. When I got that phone call, I literally I was like, I'm like, oh, sorry, thank you, But that kind of stuff made me really realize that it's a viable thing to be an artist as a full-time career. And I'm also just really proud of the fact that I just went about this my own way. I'm a DIY artist, do-it-yourself artist. So I'm not signed by any major, company. I don't have an agent, but a lot of opportunities have come my way, and I'm very proud of that fact. So with the Academy of American Poets grant, my idea was to do this book because I'm in school so much. So I hired 6 or 7 poets, went out to a lot of different schools. We did workshops, and we put it all in this book, and I'm very proud of it. So I'm going to read from this book some of the students' work, and then I will read some of my work as well. You all are an awesome audience. Thank you very much. And also, if there are any new poets or poets who are really interested in this process, I just always encourage people to just play with language. Like, make up your own world. Like, you can make up a language. You can make up words. You can do all types of things. Make up your own form. I just think that we, as artists, even though we know that we are free to create and be all like woo-woo and hippy-dippy about it, we still feel like we have rules. I don't believe in rules at all, especially with the music that I create. It's just, some of it is just noise, and some people just don't understand it. And I'm like, cool, you don't have to understand it. It was just a moment in time for me that I needed to create. So I feel like a lot of students get bogged down in, it has to be a certain way, it has to rhyme, it has to be this. It can rhyme, it doesn't have to, but you can do whatever you want. So that's one of the things that I tell students. I also do a lot of, soul-searching prompts. So one of my biggest prompts that I do in middle school and high school, it's a little bit too much for younger students, but we do an exercise where it's what the world sees and what the world doesn't see when they see you. And it's all about how we are judged. So I remember one of the students wrote, what the world sees is black male, he's a gangster, he's a threat. And then on the right, he wrote, what the world doesn't see is that I'm loyal, I love deeply, which I thought was like a really great way to say. So things like that. So I always encourage students to really look at and unpack how people might judge them, but also how we move into our authentic selves. So that's really important to me. So a lot of the poems came from that prompt. There were other prompts about like describing your morning. So those are for like younger students. Like sensory poems, I think, are important because all of us have these things in our house, and it's poetry can be a better snapshot than just a photo, like it's the way that a door handle feels, like it's the way that your cat feels when you're like petting your cat. It's the smell of bacon or something like that, or the way that birds sound outside. There's so many sensory things that are going on that I think younger students can really write well. So, I'm going to read some of these poems, and those are some of the prompts that was used, and I'm proud of the stuff that they wrote. So this is one of the poems, a poem that I put on the back of the book because I just loved it so much. It was just, this is by a 6th grader. And she said, it's called The Sad Reality. So I love that title. How I wish I was a bubble dancing in the water, reaching for the top, until I came to the sad reality that soon I would pop. 6th grader, there's so much sadness in it, and such, I love that, the sad reality. It's like, stay in your bubble, like that is my world. Okay, so this is a 5th grader. Wish I had 3 hands here. Okay, this is a 5th grader. It's called Morning Rain. And this is one of the ones where we talked about describing the world around you, describing what you hear in your house. Okay, 5th grader. As I awake, I smell my mom making fresh morning coffee. I hear the coffee grounds crunching and crackling. I put my pile of stuffed animals beside me. As I yawn and stretch, I hear the raindrops. They sound like acorns dropping. I get out of my bunk bed and take all of my stuffed animals and reorganize them. I go say good morning to my siblings and my mom, then I let my dogs out. They push me out of the way and they run like cheetahs. My mom and I will go make breakfast. I step on the cold, icy floor and run to get my slippers. Then we make breakfast together. This is like a simple piece. But I'm always impressed by that. I'm like, you really just described what your morning is in a poetic way, like that icy cold floor. Like I felt that. So this is one from When You Look at Me, or What the World Sees, What the World Doesn't See. This within, I want you to see the outside does not, I want you to see what the outside does not show. The world is quick to judge, to not truly see what's inside. So anyway, that's just a quick one. But I feel like everyone can relate to that. Like I feel like we're all playing some sort of role, but then inside there's a little bit of sadness. And it's interesting to me, like we all have sadness, but we don't talk about it enough. I'm a dad to a daughter who is 3. And just having healthy emotional conversations at that age, I think is important to reframe how we think about sadness. It's okay to be sad. It's also okay to be angry. And that's the thing that I talk about when it comes to issues about race. We focus on the forgiveness piece with the Emmanuel 9, but I know family members who will never forgive the shooter and who will never go back to the church. We got to talk about that. It can't all be framed as like, oh, they forgave, everything was great, they responded. There are people going through trauma over this. This is another one. It's another one about coffee. I didn't encourage them to write about coffee so much, but this is a 12th grader, and this might be my favorite poem in here. Ode to Coffee. Are there any coffee drinkers in the house? Yeah, so I don't drink coffee. I think I'm an alien, but I relate it to the feeling here. Ode to Coffee, 12th grade. Jealous of the way you always make me feel alive, like a star that hasn't stopped burning. Or maybe it has, and we just don't know it yet. And you're never the same thing twice. There's hints of change, signs almost sweet one moment, bitter the next, because we've changed the recipe every time. You keep me awake even when I don't want to be. You give me energy when I've used it all up. That dark, hazy brown keeps me warm, makes me feel at home, and though it burns sometimes, I can't function without it. And soon I'm out of you. Tea is a temporary replacement, because even though it's warm and sweet, it isn't you. I love that. I love that poem. All right, I'm going to read a few more from the students. I wrote down my favorite ones. All right, so let's go back. Let's go to a fifth grader. I believe this is an alliteration. No, okay, no, this isn't. Yeah, this is alliteration and sort of a sensory as well. Fifth grade. I awake to the sound of birds singing a harmony, singing a song that's special to me. Tweet, tweet, tweet. Some cars go by beeping a harmony, beeping a song that's special as well. Beep, beep, beep. Music is beautiful. Music is art. Music is life. Music is easy. Make a song and don't even try. All you need is a beat to start. Make sure that you sing from the heart. Music and poetry are exactly the same. Poetry and music should only have one name. Isn't that great? That's great. All right, and I'll read one more from the students. They would all be embarrassed that I'm picking them out this way, but that's me. All right, so this is a ninth grader. Yeah, I love this piece as well. It's called Falling Out of Love. Yeah, ninth grade. I didn't know that. Falling out of love burns like a spoonful of hot sauce, then forced to swallow. Falling out of love burns like a sore throat, scraping at your vocal cords as hard swallows drip down your neck. Falling out of love tastes like burnt sugar cookies, hard and crumbly, chipping a tooth, attempting to take a bite, trying not to spit it out. Falling out of love feels like wet grass, the morning dew, seeping into your shorts, your bottom, now soggy and cold, trying to dust it off, but the dampness doesn't go away. Falling out of love is like untied shoelaces, entangling themselves between your ankles, dragging you to the concrete, skidding your knees and scraping your hands. Falling out of love feels like burning your tongue on scorching soup, charring your taste buds, preventing you from enjoying your favorite foods, replacing their flavors with tastelessness. Falling out of love lingers like sorrowful clouds, depositing onto unsuspecting Tuesday afternoons, creeping around the sun until Wednesday comes. Come on, y'all. Okay, so snaps for students. Yeah, and I always set myself up, so I'm like, I'm reading my stuff after that. All right, so this is a poem that I actually wrote for students to get them activated in poetry. Because so I've learned a lot being in schools. I used to just go there and read, and then I just wouldn't get good reactions and stuff. I'm like, write about your feelings. And I'm like, what feelings? So it took me a lot. But I'm really interested in the way that poetry is written, not necessarily what you're writing about. I think it's interesting to focus on the language, because everybody can say, I feel sad, but how do you say that? How you say that is important. So I wrote this for students, particularly younger students. Did you know that poets are superheroes? We have a God-like grasp of language and the power to transform any emotion into alliteration. We sit with sadness until it spins out of silence onto paper. We craft confessional poems with the spark of a metaphor and the speed of a comet. We are saviors of science, protectors of expression. If there is no answer, poets write down the question. Did you know that poets are rappers? Sometimes will rhyme in standard time where every other line is a rhythmic sound will bring you in with the stroke of a pen and make you believe that every word is profound. Our books are bound to be mirrors of thought, transparent voices for hidden pain. And spoken word poets, we scream so loud our voices become melodic refrains. Did you know that poets are mathematicians? We solve puzzles with wordplay using couplets of description. We obsess over scores for slam competitions. We carefully count syllables when writing haikus. We painstakingly pick out 6-line patterns for sestinas. There's palindromes, pentunes, villanelles, and prose. Poems are meticulously and miraculously mapped out like calculus. Did you know that poets are astronauts? We can be weightless with writer's block or gridlocked with gravity. We'll take our words from the page to the stage, to the planets, from an abstract idea to the proof of new galaxies where synonyms become stanzas, then satellites of sound. Yeah, one of the reasons I wrote that is really just to get them to be like, oh yeah, poets are something. Wait, poetry and math? I'm like, it's all in there. I'm counting syllables all the time. You know? I never realized that would be such a big thing around this. Oh yeah, I should mention, getting the ego trip. I'm not used to this. So I write operas as well. This is well for me to say that. Anyway, I write operas, so I'm currently writing an opera for the Chicago Opera Theater that's going to premiere in the spring of next year. I got into opera by chance, really. There was a composer from Chicago reached out to me a couple of years ago and said that he wanted a poem about the Emmanuel Nine, and he Googled me and found some of my stuff. And so I wrote this poem for him that was turned into an opera, and an opera singer sang it on his album. And what I didn't realize was that this opera singer is like really big in the opera world. So I didn't know anything about opera at the time. And then I heard my name on NPR once, and then it was like the Washington Post did a story about his album, and then they mentioned the song that I wrote. NPR later put it as one of their top 100 songs of 2021. And I was like, what is happening? So, because of that, a lot of opera doors have opened up for me. So I'm represented by an opera agency, particularly for opera stuff. And they put my name in front of some operas. So I am now writing lyrics for operas now, which is really wild. But yeah, I'm really excited. A new opera for the Chicago Opera Theater is happening in the spring of next year. So I should always mention that. I always make that. Okay, so I'm going to read a super personal poem. I'll read 3 more poems, and then we can do some Q&A if you are interested in that. And this is from my latest book, Hold What Makes You Whole. That's going to come out April 4th. I have a big show at the Charleston Music Hall. You all should definitely come to that on April 4th. Yeah, putting myself out there on a big stage. It's like, that place holds 1,000. So I'm just stepping into faith, knowing that it's going to be a great experience. But that is a big room, so even if like 100 people come, it's going to feel a little weird. So, but it's going to be a good mental exercise for me to be in a space like that. But anyway, this is one of the new poems from that book, and it is about my speech impediment. It's called Another Poem About Stuttering. My voice box is a record player stuck on a loop, locked inside a soundproof room. Sometimes I am the only one who hears the dense echo of my vibrato, and other times I open my mouth and everyone around me knows that my tongue is a muscle too weak to lift the weight of sound. When I was younger, a speech therapist told me the key to unlocking the melody was in my mind, but I told him that depression is tone deaf, and there is no way to move the needle without hearing a rhythmic negative voice spinning inside my head. I've always believed that conversation is not the best way to interact with sound, and the people who hold on to silence the longest are the ones who can hear God. That's why it's my intention to build a community with the quiet, to take off my headphones and hear heart-focused interaction in stereo. My speaking voice is not my thinking voice, is not my poet voice. If I can't say my name around you, it's not because I don't believe in its power. It's because I tripped on the cord on the way to the microphone. I used to think I needed a power cord to be turned on. I used to obsess over the dust that scratches my throat. I used to not know that any noise I make is pure human sound, and I am not a broken record. Repeat after me. You are not a broken record. Okay, so I would assume everyone in here has been to Charleston, right? Or who has not been to Charleston? Okay, yeah. So this is a poem about, I was about to say, this is a city about that poem. This is a poem about that city, and it's one that I've been writing over time. I wrote this when I first moved to Charleston in 2003. I wrote the first part of it because I was like going out a lot. So a lot of it is about that. And then it sort of evolved over time as I've deepened my relationship with the city. This is called The Pulse, a poem about Charleston. We live in Charleston, where the sidewalks scream on Saturday nights and the corners rotate budding musicians with skin-tight dreams, where strings of pearls search for salvation, then sweat out their frustrations on the backs of rooftops, where the homeless sprout like weeds through concrete seeking $2, a handshake, and a little bit of sunshine, where the humidity chokes you out of your breath, but you still manage to speak to the spit-shine waiters who serve $95 bottles of wine, where 2 blocks away, a $5 pitcher of liquid gold spills on the canvas of sticky floors, where love lingers on cobblestone streets in narrow alleyways, but the smell of sex is the foundation for first and last impressions. We live in Charleston, where shadows are surrounded by the ocean and seeing people gasp for air from knee-deep bills and dirt-cheap thrills, where those with no sense of history's melody sync with the songs of the city's slaves, where the poets scrape stanzas off of streetlights, and if they scream loud enough, maybe someone won't be afraid of the dark. I live in Charleston, where church steeples and cranes look over us, and multicolored houses house live-in servants, where fast-rising hotels rise above slow-moving clouds that cast floods on the corner of America Street, where parades of one color get one day to celebrate MLK, then hide in the shadows of gentrification, where Gullah cuisine is too expensive for Gullah people, the holy city, where the steady beat of jazz is the beat of our streets and the dialect of our past writes future conversations, where bridges and bike lanes break bread with politics while some of us preach peace with uneducated tongues, where the angel oak tree is young compared to our vanity, where $16 burgers are sold in the middle of a food desert while every community wants a piece of the pie, where grandmothers sit on porches watching us change while the problems of our city remain the same. We live in Charleston, where the ghosts in yoga studios call themselves holy, and the vintage market calls itself holy, and the whiskey drinkers go to church to feel tender and holy, where potholes and potheads blow smoke through steam-filled summers, and the pandemic was brushed away like palmetto bugs laughing in the face of death, where some of us dream of an underground scene to hold on to the spirit of elevation, where halter tops don't stop in the winter for people with disposable incomes and opposable thumbs, the holy city, where the hurricanes are coming, where the hurricanes are coming, where the hurricanes are coming. Another Charleston is being built above our heads. Maybe that one won't flood. Okay, I'm going to read another one that's about self-care. No, I'm going to read one about my daughter, and then I'll read one about self-care, and that'll be it. Thank you all for your ears. This is called Point of View, and yeah, my daughter's 3, amazing, and she interacts with the world in such a different way than I do, and it's all real. Like, it's not, nothing is fake, you know, and I really appreciate that. And I'm always, like, when we're on walks, I might find myself in a hurry or in a rush. Yeah, that's true. Oh. Okay. And I can scream. All right, so yeah, she interacts with the world in a different way, and I find myself in a rush sometimes if I'm going to meet a friend. I hate being late, that's one of the things. But when I'm walking with her, she'll stop and look at every single acorn, you know, and pick up leaves and stuff, and I'm like, you know what, this is cool. Like, I need this. It's called Point of View. According to my daughter, a mosquito is a hummingbird, and everything that has wings is kinfolk, especially airplanes. In her mind, a banana is a yellow moon, a small green acorn is somehow a turtle, and every object within view should be rewarded with praise. In our house, we hug, incense, smoke, and tickle the plants. True story. We pull the color out of language and make rainbow-like chatter. She reminds me that all living things have the right to experience laughter. According to my daughter, the number 5 is also an S. The letter B is the number 8 with a backbone. Cat ears are flower petals. Opening a book is also opening a door. And we make drums out of every hard surface, motivate melody and mischief to flirt with the quiet. She gets up and dances after throwing her body on the floor because all of it is a song. Okay, and this is my last piece, and it ended up being, it's a newer poem, but it ends up being one of the poems that has resonated with the most, people. And while I'm up here on an ego trip, the Academy of American Poets asked me to read this poem for them for a series that they were doing called Dear Poet, and they sent the reading to a bunch of schools around the country. And I got all these letters back from students like 6th grade, 5th grade, saying that they needed to hear this, as well as like older students and adults. But this sort of as a letter to myself, particularly around being a black poet in the South when I'm commissioned to do poems. And this is all first world problems, right? Like, I'm commissioned to do poems. But a lot of times I'm asked to write about traumatic things, like write about slavery, write about lynching. So, oh yeah, there was like a shooting over here. There's just, I don't want to write about that all the time because we keep trauma in our bodies. I completely believe that. So I just needed to remind myself that there's other things out there and to not let the trauma and depression take me over. So this is called Give Yourself Some Flowers. And in the beginning, God gave your body a checklist. Keep your heart on beat and your lungs dancing with oxygen, not passive to air. Make sure the path of your blood slows down for checkpoints and avoids bumps in the road. Train your nerves to keep a balanced pace and stay within the lines of steady flow. Push forward without putting too much pressure on movement. Remember to return to water when your spirit and its frame are in drought. Treat your body like a well-rounded planet built for all seasons, or pretend you are an adaptable star. Float in the black and stay there if you need to. Save some light for yourself. In other words, rest like the sun does. Schedule some time to stay out of sight when too many people praise your warm energy. Keep in mind all of these things when depression tells you nothing is working. Keep in mind all of these things when it tells you there is no invisible force connecting us, when your veins are stopped by blood clots, when your bones are dry and the water is too quick to boil. Keep in mind all of these things when it tells you that the soul is like the body, made to be broken, open to deterioration and doubt. Yes, keep in mind all of these things and remember, even when it seems like the clock isn't ticking, you were made perfectly for this moment in time. And that is me. Yeah, thank you all so much. It's a good time. All right, yeah, it's 3:48, so I'll take some questions. I have like 200 more poems, so I'm not going to spare you all with that. Yes?
Oh, well, I'd rather hear another poem than taking questions. First of all, you're just amazing. That last one almost made me cry, and like I needed it, like you said.
Yeah, thank you.
What I wanted to ask you, your delivery is so wonderful, and you say that you have a stuttering problem, and I'm wondering if spoken word poetry helped you with that. Is that therapeutic for you? I haven't noticed any stutter. So.
Yeah, and I'll gently push back, like it isn't a problem, it's just a part.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't mean a problem.
No, sorry.
Like I said, I haven't noticed it at all.
Yeah, I'm just, and I like that is a gentle thing. Like I'm reframing the way that I talk about it.
Okay,
so.
Speech impediment is how you put it.
Right.
I've never noticed it at all, and I'm wondering if poetry had helped you with it.
I think poetry has. Yeah, poetry has just helped me to give myself grace. That's the biggest thing that poetry has done for me. Before this, I definitely thought of it in a negative light, but it's one of the reasons I became a writer, because when I was younger, it was way more pronounced. So it was frustrating for me as a kid to not be able to say everything that I wanted to say, and I could write it, and it was all there, and I could say it beautifully. But in conversation, and even now, I'm coming up with synonyms and different ways to say things. So my brain automatically does that, and I'm thankful for that now. But when I was younger, it was like, oh, it's so frustrating, and I hate it and stuff. But yeah, it's such an interesting thing. When you talk to people who have a speech impediment, they say the same thing. It's like they're constantly sort of thinking of ways around to get to an answer. So the hardest thing for me to do is to directly answer a question. Like if somebody asks me, how old are you? Like there's one answer to that, right? But I have to go like, oh, well, you know, I was born like a long time ago, 1970s and stuff, and grew up in a military family, and it's hard for me to believe that I'm 46, you know, like, so I have to get to there, but I can't just go there. And I remember one of the times that I felt pretty sad. Somebody asked me what my wife's name was, because they forgot my wife's name, and there was one answer there. And then it was one of those moments, because a lot of people are in a rush. You know, they'll ask me something, and they're just like, they're working on the next thing, you know, they aren't really there to listen. And it was one of those in passing moments, and I stuttered a lot, and I couldn't even get her name out, you know. So it's just one of those things that it'll come in random times, and I don't even realize that it's still there. But I have to through therapy. Therapy has helped me reframe the way that I speak about it, and just giving myself grace and understanding that it led me here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Any other questions for me? I do have books for sale in that too. Yes.
Were you writing the poems with the kids during the pandemic, or was that prior to?
It was actually after. Yes, yeah, it was after. But there are some students, especially the high schoolers, referenced it a lot, because that was a lot for students to go from in person and to go to Zoom stuff. But yeah, they referenced it a little bit. It wasn't as heavy on some of their minds as it is on ours still, I think. But yeah, but that was after.
Was a kid using the term sad reality?
Yeah.
It was like totally pandemic.
Yeah, right. And that's a sixth grader too. Like that's And what's interesting in schools, I know a lot of you who visit schools, it might be teachers, but it's therapy sessions. Like they need to just talk, and I'm just reminding them that through poetry, you can say whatever you want. You know, it's a safe space. Any other questions? Yes.
Marcus, I have a question about the editing of Colors Wash Over Me. Were the students involved in that process, or just in creating an original work that then the adult poet sort of took charge of and edited toward publication?
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of editing from their point. We did a lot of working and reworking within the class, but once the class was over, you know, they handed the stuff to me, and I didn't edit a lot of it as far as like hard line edits. I wanted to make sure that what they were trying to say is there, and even if it sounds a little funny, like that's cool, because it's a hard thing. That's not a strength of mine, is editing. A strength of mine is making things like look good and and all that. But because I always put the way that I would write it into a poem, so that's the thing that I haven't been able to like get over. And then Zoe, who's the poet in here, sent me some poems, and it took me a long time to get to it, because sometimes I feel like people want me to like hard edit, and I'm like, I don't want that. Like I just like, if it sounds good, I think it's good, and I just want to make sure that it's authentic, and that's important to me. But no, there wasn't a lot of editing from the kids. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Yes.
You talk a lot about, you alluded to musicians and poetry and kind of blend there. Why is it that so few songwriters are considered poets? Which sounds to me like they really are. But rarely are songwriters identified as poets.
Yeah, I've always thought that that's curious as well. I mean, I think that I always mention about influences, but the first time I really was aware of poetry was listening to Joni Mitchell when I was younger, and the way that she flipped words and stuff, I'd never heard that before, and it was really amazing. And I completely consider her a poet. I consider like Lana Del Rey. I love Lana Del Rey. She writes amazing lyrics as well. I was listening to a lot of her stuff on the drive here. So I definitely believe that, poets are musicians. And when I was younger, and definitely now I buy a lot of records, it's kind of my habit, but I read a lot of lyrics I'm not sure why. There's like academic poets will scoff at that, but I don't. So, yeah. Awesome, good question. Yes.
I was just going to ask, because you say you also compose music. So
Mhm.
do you just do music a separate thing, or do you compose lyrics and then you put that in music? Do you feel it kind of swell up in you with the music? Does one come first and the other comes second? And when you're creating, when you're given a subject to write a poem about, is there a certain way you kind of prepare?
Okay, yeah.
To draw a poem out, or
Awesome question. So, music is definitely my first love. I started making music when I was 10 years old. I call it music back then, but it was just me singing into a Casio keyboard and a tape machine. But I was just making up songs about pancakes and chicken and stuff like that. I actually wrote a song called No More Chicken when I was 11, and it's about I was cooking chicken in the oven and it fell on the floor and ants came on it and I was sad. Like anyway, but there was a melody there. Anyway, music is my first thing, so I'm always making music, and it's usually a lot of it now is it's instrumental stuff. So I do a lot of sampling. So I've got drum machines and synthesizers, and I make ambient music. But sometimes I put lyrics to it. Sometimes I sing, play the guitar. Sometimes I do spoken word over it. It's all just what I'm feeling in that moment. I heard an artist. My favorite artist is Ani DeFranco, and she talked about when she's writing. Sometimes she feels like she's a horse walking the street, and like she just like poops and then keeps on going and keeps on. Things like, oh yeah, like I did that. Now it's time to move on. Like sometimes I feel like that with my music. I'm just making stuff and I put it out, and then years later I'm like, oh yeah, I did that album about like being a computer back in the day. Like I just am always just creating stuff. So it's all sort of woven in together. Music is definitely, or poetry is definitely musical to me because it has to have a rhythm to me for it to make sense. So it's all sort of in there. And I love that. Yeah. The second question about when I'm asked to write a poem, how I go about that. So I can really speak on this freshly. So is that a word, freshly? It is now. But I was asked to write 3 original poems for amazing people. So I wrote a poem for Danny Glover, the actor, like Lethal Weapon and all that. And I got to meet him and give him a poem, a framed poem, and a poem for Andrew Young, civil rights icon, and a poem for Dr. Bobby Jones, who's a gospel icon. And I had like 2 weeks to write this thing. A guy who got in touch with me was like, yeah, like they're all going to be in the room, a lot of celebrities, and we want you to perform these 3 original poems. Next week, can you do it? I'm like, sure. So when I did that, I immediately started to find stories about them, in interviews, and I listened to their voice, and I just pulled out things that they kept saying. So Andrew Young, who's 90, he was talking about the first time he felt called to do civil rights work. He went up on this mountain, and it was called King Mountain. And he looked over, and he realized that like everything is connected, and it's up to him to make sure that people realize that everyone is connected. So I wrote about him being a mountain of a man, and then being next to Dr. King, and I called the poem The Mountain King, things like that. So I just pull sort of stuff from their life and things that they keep bringing up. So it's the way that I talk to kids or students about it is it's almost like you're cooking. You know that you're going to make a dish, but you have to make your ingredients too. You have to make your ingredients. So my ingredients are, watching an interview and jotting down little things that he says, and now I have like a list of all these things, and I put it together into a poem. So that's how I do that. Yeah, and it is a hard process. Like it's really strains the brain, especially when you know it's going to be performed and cameras and stuff. Like it's not an easy thing, but I love the challenge. And once the poem is done, there's such a big exhale Or two more. Okay, yes.
I was just curious, writing the operas and the music you do, it made me think of Broadway and musicals. And anyway, is that any thoughts in your mind in terms of working on something like that?
Yeah, I'm definitely open to it. I mean, at this point, I'm getting out of the way. Like, I never thought that I would be writing operas and doing the stuff that I'm doing. So, yeah, if opportunities like that come, I'm happy to make it work. And what's interesting in the opera world, I'm looked upon as like a fresh voice, and I feel like I've been writing for 3,000 years, you know. But yeah, so I'm excited. What the opera people who are in touch with me are excited about that I don't know a lot about opera because I'm writing it in a different way. Like, I'm not adhering to rules, and there's all these terms. Like, the opera that I'm writing now, they have me talking to somebody. It's called a dramaturg. Has anybody heard that term?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I was like, what is that? Dramaturg? Like, it's such a funny word. Like, oh yeah, this is like they come and then they edit it and help to shape it and stuff like that. So anyway, it's cool for me to be new in this, but also doing it. So yeah, I'm open to Broadway. If anybody there who's watching on Facebook, I'll write you a Broadway show. You know? Okay, and last question.
I have a question, but I just wanted to commend you on your honesty and your on-stage interplay with your ego. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
Because far too often as artists and writers and poets, we play that down. That's a real part of who we are because it wasn't we were doing. And I also wanted to say I too had a horrible speech impediment. And listening to you say that sometimes you talk around things, I didn't realize that I do that, but I do.
Oh yeah. Wow, yeah. It's nice to meet another person who's
And
had
I started
that.
writing very early because of that, because I had difficulty talking.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's so many more people who go through this than I thought. Like, I found out with Bill Withers, classic singer, had a speech impediment as well, and there was a documentary where he went and spoke to students who have that shared experience, and it was just cool for me to hear stuff like that. And James Earl Jones, Amanda Gorman, is probably the most famous poet right now. Yeah, she had one, I think. So anyway, yeah, it's just and thank you for the authenticity. That's a really big part of who I am. Like, I'm through with trying to pretend like I'm cool. Like, I just this is me. Like, I'm going through everything that everyone else is going through, and we have a shared experience. I am a hippie. So cool. Well, thank you all again. I'm selling some books in the back. I've got